Hey, it's Scott Lips, and welcome back to yet another episode of Spin Magazine's Lip Service. I'm joined today with the members of Sunflower Bee and Julie Cumming. Nick Kevlin, how are you?
Hey,
Great. How are
really
you?
good. How are you?
Great to see you both. You guys are alumni, second time on the show.
I got scouted by YSL.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that, so you beat me to it. But yeah, Eddie Slimane finds you. You end up doing the campaign as a musician.
Yeah.
Which is great. And we talked about that a little bit last time, but we were just touching base on the fact that now you're also doing things as an artist, as a musician.
Yeah.
And it's about time.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think you paid more than your dues, and the band's done so great. So it's great to see the fashion community also recognize the fact that you have this great band too, which, I feel like people want a story now. It's not about just being, pretty or beautiful. I mean, it's really about what's your story? What do you stand for? Do you have, something to say? Is there, and you've obviously used your voice in numerous ways in your platform. And I want to talk about that too. So I guess along the way now, I think it's great that you work with so many great people, Stephen Meisel, Pat McGrath, YSL was great for you early on. So I guess what does fashion mean to you now that the band is 3 records in, you've had success, you've played festivals, you've had top 50 records in the UK, you work with the Manic Street Preachers. This is sort of your bio, I guess, right?
Yeah.
But what does fashion mean to you now that you've done both, side by side?
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting, like before the pandemic, we did our show with Bernie Sanders and the Strokes in New Hampshire, which was like a real high point in our career. It was right after we did Gov Ball, which was definitely one of my favorite festival sets ever. And we had just finished the Beck tour. We were just coming off of a lot of really cool stuff. And then the pandemic happened and we were sort of forced to put everything on hold and just write and not really talk to the world about it because, it was like when you come back after this, it'll be bigger. And now that we've kind of come back, I feel like we're looked at more in this light, right? Where it's like, you've done so much. It's almost like we're placed in this different, like where we fit into the 2010s is different because before all of this, in my life, we were just moving full steam ahead. It wasn't like we weren't really looking at it like a past thing. It was just our lives.
Constantly touring. I think, Nick, you didn't even have an apartment until not long ago, right?
Until the pandemic.
So now in this moment, I do have more time to kind of reflect on all of it. And I mean, I feel really lucky. I've always loved style in the way only in bands. I had when I was a kid, I didn't give a shit about clothes. My mom took me to Kmart 2 times a year and to the fucking men's barber shop because I didn't want to brush my hair. So I spent my whole kid life with a little boy haircut and, my little Kmart clothes and just be a little nerd. But fashion only came into my life through music. And I really love the way that, bands are a fantasy. Music is a fantasy. And there's a lot in what you don't say that's more important almost than what you say. And clothes and how you look is your first step into that room. It's the beginning of the story that you're trying to tell. So it's super important. And I'm really grateful to the brands and designers that have seen that with me and wanted to tell those stories with me.
And when you get discovered at like 17 and you end up doing YSL, I mean, that's got to change your life too, right? I mean, that was something that like you literally, like you said, you were in school, you were on the road playing music, but you hadn't had success at that point, really. So, and he loves to discover, to discover people when they haven't really done much. Yeah. So that must have been such an incredible thing for you at that point too.
It was. I think a lot of times I thought that someone was going to like pull the curtain out and everyone,
this is not real.
Yeah. A lot of it was very surreal for sure. My parents were not in fashion. I never thought that something like that was going to happen, but I did see Rachel had done some modeling in the city and we had done photo shoots in that first band. So I kind of had like an understanding that modeling could be a way for me to do music. And so I pursued it. I tried to get, I did work for it. It definitely wasn't until YSL that things really happened.
I think Nick can do a YSL ad now too, because he's got that look too, right?
They flew Nick out too, but he got.
Did they really?
Yeah, I got cut from the show the night of.
Oh, right. Well, now I think you're ready for your YSL campaign. I always thought, Julie, that you were actually born in almost like the wrong decade, because you were always like an old soul to me, and your music initially for me, it reminded me of like Fleetwood Mac, and there's I love some of the first record we were talked about it when we first chatted, and yeah, I mean, you ever feel like you were born in the wrong decade, especially now with this TikTok generation, everything's 15 seconds, and it leads me to the discussion about your new record, because I feel like that's sort of part of the idea of the new record, you know, living through this pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, I think you get what you get, and if you think too much about what you've missed, it's almost like an excuse for not making the most of what you have. Which I do think we do have, like, so many, even in the social media era, which is like can be deeply annoying. You do have such a different access to people, you know, that isn't gatekept through the record companies necessarily. And I think that a lot of that is good. I do think it's the hardest time ever to be like a musician whose only goal isn't like going viral. But I think we're in a transition period in general. I think everyone knows that. And I think the job of being a musician or being an artist is adapting and looking at the situation you're in. And if you don't, you know, anyone in the arts, you can leave anytime and no one will give a shit. You know what I mean? True. And the only people that make it are the ones that want to be here the most.
Persevere.
I mean, you can still listen to all the music that was made in those decades before
true.
Now. So I'm not sure. It's like it's probably like a 6-hour conversation about how things have changed. Yeah. I think that the way our album and the way our career and what we had to do to promote a record in 2018 was probably closer to the way it was in 1964 than the way it is now in 2022.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, I mean, if you look at this generation, everyone consumes music in 15-second snippets. Yeah. And when you write a record, I love vinyl. I love putting on a record and letting it play, you know, from start to finish. But I don't think music was intended to be consumed in 15-second snippets.
I mean, it's just the format and drives the media. So now the format is 15 to 30 seconds. So we might make an album that's just choruses. And I like listening to music like that. So it might be fun to make songs that are just, 30-second clips.
That would be great. Just choruses. You heard it here,
just
folks.
Choruses.
The next record is only choruses.
Not the next one, but maybe in the future.
I do think that it is. What does kind of get me is that on TikTok or within those 15 seconds or 30 seconds is you need a punchline. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like comedy has kind of become everything. And I love comedy, but I do think that when it is like the only tool that is used to make music easier to sell, I do think that comedy isn't the best way to express a lot of things that are expressed in music all the time. So I do think that's risky, that everything has to be written like copy for an ad.
I agree. I mean, well, so 2020, take me back to around March. I know you were probably getting off the road because you were doing like 150 shows a year before that. So you finally had some downtime and you finally have what turned out to be a couple of years now to make this record. Yeah. Head Full of Sugar is about the joyful aspects of life. It's funny because it's almost the opposite of what we just went through. And if you look at what's going on in the world today, it's not, I want to be optimistic because I'm an eternal optimist, but it's not the most enticing period of life I've ever been through. It's pretty dark in some respects, but you come out and make this record that's fun. It's almost a dance psychedelic record. So now that the record's been out, you've had some time. I mean, it's only been out, let's say a month or so. I think it came out May 6th, right? What was the idea behind the record in terms of like the real joyful aspect, Head Full of Sugar, and everything sort of being fun and uplifting, considering what we've just been through? Yeah.
When we were making it, I think we were all living together at this house, and it was a very insular little squad of people that we had there. And the recording process, since we were doing it at home, was almost like this like really low budget, less amazing, like Exile on Main Street thing, where the living room was the control room with like the mixing desk and the monitor. and the tracking room was the dining room. So we took the dining room table out of the dining room and set up a drum kit with all these baffles and just like tried to get things as sounding as good as possible in this dining room. This is an apartment,
by the way.
No, this isn't a small house upstate.
Okay.
And then we turned the bathroom into the vocal booth. And we just kind of worked on things at like a really like leisurely fun pace. Like we would like grill and have like tiny parties in the house we were living in, and just sort of trying to like cultivate this feeling of being out of the pandemic and thinking about the world when it was open and when you could go anywhere and meet new people and do things. And a lot of the inspiration was this sort of imagining like that time coming back. We didn't want to go insular. We didn't want to make something that was raw or a draining, like sort of like closed in, like folky or small sounding album. We were imagining the world open as sort of a lifeline to hoping that we could be there again someday.
It's interesting because I was going to say your first record was probably the three of you just jamming, you know, in a rehearsal studio. The second record, 22 in Blue, was quite ambitious. You had strings, you know, orchestration. And this record feels like probably a lot less pressure because you could just take your time when you're recording at home initially. And I know you finished some of it at like Electric Ladyland and some other studios.
Yes, yeah. So we recorded for like about a year and a half. We wrote like so many songs. We would write a song like one a week, and not only would it be written, but we would record it and produce it pretty much to completion. And then we would send it to our producer, JP, and he basically just went like, he would get it and he would be like, oh, that's cool. Like you should keep working on this. Like I might do something on this. Like I might add string, like synths or whatever. And if he didn't like something, we would just put it on a SoundCloud and move on.
Yeah, it was just kind of this like sort of keep going experience. As long as we could. And I think we did have this feeling, you were kind of touching on it, where I think we thought a lot of the records coming out of this time were going to be very kind of negative because people were spending all this time like stewing with their emotions, which were kind of dark. And for us as well. And our interpretation of that was, to kind of go in the opposite direction and make something that people would want to enjoy and make something that people would want to play again. And it's interesting. I've been thinking about this a little bit, like, you know, even yesterday, it's like the record to me is almost like a very sincere version of like the concept of like de-evolution, since we're talking about Devo, you know, like when you think of Sugar, you know, there is the very literal sweetness of the poppier aspects of the record. And there's also kind of the sinister poison that comes with consuming something that is so free of nutrients. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like something that can harm you. You know, Sugar is both. And like with the genres and with this, you know, live stuff, we also, I think it is, with the record being so short, like it is kind of a point about the culture that we're living in, and making something that lives right now, making a psychedelic rock pop record for the now. It is short. It is powerful. It is fierce. It is, you know, tight, because these are the circumstances that we're living in. So we kind of used all of that context to make this, you know, and I hope that the realness of like who we are and how we try to approach music kind of comes through the, you know, kind of sweetness. I think.
Definitely does. I was going to say, digging into some of the tracks on the record, like there's a track like Roll the Dice, which was definitely a commentary on capitalism. And, you know, you talk a little bit about the GameStop situations and crypto and everything going on in this world, right? So talk about that a little bit, because you definitely dig into current affairs and what's going on in life too on the record.
As a band, I feel like we're not like a very insular band. Like a lot of our band, like a lot of my writing at least, is pulling from the people I'm friends with and the things that are happening in the world, and like going out and overhearing conversations. And, you know, the three of us all work together and we all discuss things together all the time. And it creates like this sort of outward looking art where we have like this community of friends around us in New York that also help us make the art, whether they're acting in our music videos or doing like design work for us, or are literally like on stage with us, like helping us like run the shows at times. Our manager Krista is now doing our lights.
I love it.
For instance. But it really does feel like there's like a community that's been like formed around our band, and all our friends know each other. And it isn't like the kind of like in your room by yourself writing about your feelings or writing about a breakup or like journalistic in that sort of way. It's more of like, I feel like this record is sort of like trying to capture almost like a slice of life in a way. And I try not to like make like, excuse me, like any like conclusions or judgments or like values like added to it. So a song like Roll the Dice is kind of just like trying to get off your chest like what it feels like you have to do to survive, and what people around us are talking about in terms of what they feel like their lives are like, and just not having a stable relationship to your career or to money or to housing or to healthcare or to all these other things that so many people in this country are experiencing.
Because you hear these stories now of these 15-year-olds that like hid in crypto and they're millionaires. You know, like when I was growing up, you just had to have like a 9-to-5 job.
People don't think that their life will be stable economically unless they get extremely lucky or make big gambles or take big risks on things. And like that is not the way, frankly, most people get to a place of stability, but that's what people feel they have to do.
Definitely.
It's just like the American dream is so nakedly not happening that you have to put all your money into NFTs or crypto to like, I know I've heard recently it being compared to people talking about like, this is like our generation's version of buying property or buying a house, which is so funny because it's, you know, a JPEG of an ape or whatever. You know, the jokes are never ending with it. But
what about the people buying like land in the metaverse? That's like, I just bought a house next to Snoop Dogg's. It's in my computer. I'll never get to actually be in it. Well, it was $1 million.
We've run out of things to sell, and we need to keep on expanding the market, or else the whole thing is going to fall apart. So they're just thinking of literally new ways to create like consumer markets or create places where rich people can move their money around.
Agreed. And Baby Don't Cry, one of my other favorite songs on the record. Let's talk about that. Such a straight ahead, like pop rock song, great song. What was the sort of the thought process behind that song?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one is another, I feel like kind of example of like, kind of like we referenced the radio on it a few times, and even like NPR, and it has that radio rock sound, you know, that kind of, it like starts out on that big chorus. So a lot of times we were, you know, like that's part of the genre, is part of the sentiment. But yeah, I think that song for me is one of the more like, it's a very grounding place on the record. It's kind of like, in my mind, similar to a song like Other Side, where it's like with Roll the Dice, you're going very big and you're very political without necessarily using political language. But then you have moments like Baby Don't Cry, which are sort of referencing being in the back of your parents' car, listening to the radio, and how that made you feel back then, and kind of yearning for something real. You know, even like a reference on the song that we make, The Caretaker, is a British artist who makes, I always have a hard time describing The Caretaker.
Yeah, he basically remixes like parlor music from the 20s and creates like these long loops that are like really ambient and reverbed out. And they kind of have like this effect of like sounding like almost like they're like inside like humans, like this sort of like cultural memory of like a time that you didn't actually live in. And they're very like warm and fuzzy and nostalgic sounding. And whenever I play it for people, they're like, oh my God, this reminds me of The Shining. And I think that's really interesting, because The Shining is about like, you know, that sort of like false memories in a way.
Yeah. So, you know, Hauntology.
Yeah. And just like I guess that song is sort of like talking about how there's so many things that you constantly are bombarded by that are trying to manipulate you, and like all your data being sold all the time, and you're being targeted with ads and even on the subway, like every single ad you see on the subway is about living your life less. It's like delivery. There's a dating app ad on the subway where it's like, this app is meant to be deleted, like make dating as efficient as possible. Right. Like meet one person and get it out of the way. It's like live your life in a way so that you can maximize your productivity and be at home looking at a screen. And Baby Don't Cry is kind of about like trying to tune all that stuff out and engaging with things that are made by real people in a way that's meant to be, you know, for lack of a better term, made with love and like sort of like actually nurture you in a way that is personal and creates a real lasting meaning in your life.
Connection. Yeah. It is my favorite song on the record, but great track and such an optimistic record. And I love the record, by the way.
Thank you.
You're getting ready for a tour, so we should talk about that. I have the dates here. It's like you're actually leaving, like you said, tomorrow, San Diego, LA, San Francisco, Portland, Vancouver, Seattle, and Denver. So this is exciting. Do you have a newfound appreciation for touring, given what we just went through? I mean, and we were, you know, being an indie band, by the way, you guys have been very successful. Still not easy, right? Even when you're, you know, I think at some point, my only thing at some point when I was like touring was like, I just have to have a roadie, you know, like I just do not want to set up my own drums. Like I don't ask for much, but I don't want to set up my own drums. So at this point in your career, 3 albums in, you know, I want to talk about, you even had like a #1 single not long ago with The Secret He Had Missed, the Manic Street Preachers. But what is it like for you guys being on the road now, playing festivals? You've even opened up you've done shows with like Interpol to Beck to whoever, and like we would talk about that. But what's it like being on the road for you now? Like, walk me through like a daily week for you and what goes into it.
I mean, I think the thing with Sunflower Bean is that it is a family business. It is like at this point with like with me, Nick, Krista, and Olive, and you know, and being an indie band, you really do have to think of all of it. So you know, building the show, the lights, the experience, the playlist around it, loading in, loading out, your own personal rituals. You have to be on top of all of it, and I think, you know, we have been really lucky to have this range of experiences, but I do think the pandemic has kind of sort of blown a hole through what we call the middle class of indie. And everything is kind of existing in this other state. So for us, it's complicated. You know, I think we do have a different appreciation for the shows. And I have a lot of appreciation for the people at the shows, because in America, if you get COVID and you can't work, you know, like this is very real. Gas is $7 a gallon. There's shows every night. Every band is going to come back. So
it makes it even it's challenging for people to go to shows now. I mean, I think a little less now. People have let their guard down a little bit. You know, I feel like, you know, I don't know, ticket sales are not what they should be yet. But I feel like people feel fairly comfortable now being in environments. I mean, not completely. It's still obviously very much a thing. I mean,
I think we have to see. I think that listeners have changed. And I think that, as always in the music industry, the people in charge are pointing fingers at who is supposed to pay the bill for keeping musicians alive, which nobody wants to do. And musicians are, I find, often so delightfully desperate to be understood and to communicate their work that they will accept the lowest of terms and don't know how to we don't know how to advocate for ourselves, because the dynamic has always been so different. So I think that again, like with everything, I think we're in the midst of a shift. And I think that, you know, I think with streaming, I think with live, you know, streaming has always been pointing at live, saying you're the ones that are supposed to keep them fed. So why don't you keep them on the road 200 nights out of the year until their backs are breaking, and then they can maybe have an apartment.
We'll give you a fraction of a penny every time we play your song.
And I think that now that when people get a record, the difference that when they listen to that record, their first thought is not, I'm going to go to the show. The first thought is, oh, I like this record, I'm going to watch Netflix.
Yeah, is there any reason why, by the way, because I'm sure along the way you could have signed to a major, but you decided to really do this on your own. And is there sort of a thought process behind, you know, the DIY aspect versus, because for sure you could have, I'm sure many major labels would have scooped you up if you wanted that. But I feel you probably chose this route to sort of be independent. Would you have any thoughts on the process of like doing it yourself versus maybe at some point you could have signed to a major. I'm sure you could have, even probably today you could if you wanted to.
I mean, I think kind of the theme of this part of the conversation, the music industry is very sinister. I have said this many times, which people don't understand, more sinister than the modeling industry by far, because obviously there's fucked up things that happen in fashion. But when it comes to how the industry works, it's very clear. You're doing good or you're not. You get the job or you don't. They like how you look or they don't. If they don't, you don't have to take it that seriously because you don't have that much control over how you look.
Sure.
But with your art, with your music and your soul, when people take that and they fuck with that, or you get shelved, or they tell you what to do, or they don't let you put out work, it could kill you. If it could really, it could really hurt you. And I think because I had a lot of experiences in Super Cute, even on a small level, getting into bad deals, bad managers, a lot of men who wanted to take advantage of me. And when it came to doing Sunflower Bean, when we found Krista, our manager, it was more about trying to find people who I thought to be honest and who believed in the project. And, I loved being an indie band. I love being an indie band. I don't know what that means now in 2022. I don't know if anyone knows what the future of the record label industry is.
Yeah, I was going to say you probably appreciate it that much more when you get a call to open up for Beck or to play Glastonbury or to do Lollapalooza because you worked so hard for it versus someone saying, here's tour support, I'm going to give you $1 million a year, you're going out on this tour, paying for everything. Right. You appreciate it more. There's no way you can't, I would imagine, right? Oh,
yeah, definitely. I mean, if we signed to a major, maybe we would just be in development hell forever,
Yeah, I think, there's
no way to know. I mean, the music industry is changing so much that if we were to have this conversation a year from now, we'd probably all be wrong about our predictions and things will be working in a way that they aren't working now. I mean, it's changing so fast.